Good afternoon. The town of Hinton respectfully acknowledges that it is located on the First Peoples traditional lands. We recognize its traditional territory to show respect and understanding to those who have walked this land since time immemorial. Today, we uphold our ongoing responsibility to work together in the spirit of the intent of the treaties with all the First Peoples and nations that call this place home. The town expresses gratitude for the opportunity to build a better community on these sacred lands for generations to come. And with that, we will call this meeting to order at 4 p.m. And we will look to begin with the adoption of the agenda. Administration, any changes or additions to the agenda?
No changes.
Council, any changes, additions, or we also can look for a motion to Councillor. Go ahead.
I move to adopt the agenda for December 10th, 2023.
Thank you, Councillor Race. We have got a motion to adopt the agenda. Council, any discussion? Seeing none, if we can please vote now. And Councillor Taylor is voted in favor physically. And so that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much, Council. We'll begin with citizens' minutes of council. Ms. David Campbell, is there anybody registered this evening?
No, there's not.
Perfect. We will move on to the reports from administration. Item 4.1, Parks, Recreation and Culture user fees, supplemental information report. Admin?
Thank you, Chair. I will turn this one over to Ms. Wade.
Thank you, CAO. Committee, this item is before you this evening. It's a return item from September 10th, the committee of the whole meeting where we reviewed the attached fees that are outlined in attachment 2. Those were directed, as you can see, to be brought forward for approval at regular. However, council was seeking additional information regarding 2 items. Item 1 being the recuperation rate of our fees in comparison to other municipalities, as well as some information on a low-income program or fee. So if we scroll into the analysis section on page 4 of the agenda, I've created a chart here where you can see that our municipal comparators, their recuperation rates range from 25% to 40%. And then at the bottom, I kind of highlighted Hinton's rate if it's just fees versus the inclusion of our concession rental revenue, which drives that, which anyways, they're different. So we're middle of the road there. We are missing any data from Edson, Coaldale, Morinville, and Evansburg. They didn't participate in returning any information to us. And then we have the low income program, which is essentially an exact duplication of the program recently approved for FCSS. I've spoken with the FCSS manager, and we will keep separate statistics if we decide to go ahead with this program, but it will largely be administered through the FCSS office. So when they come in and get their low income transit pass, they'll have the option to do the same, get their rec pass, and then just pop over, get their picture taken at the rec center, and we'll send them on their way, and they would have access to our facility. We don't anticipate that there will be any losses associated with running the low income program. Ultimately, those individuals are likely underserved by recreation currently. So we actually think we'll see greater usage if we implement this program. With that, I can take any questions.
Sounds good. Council? Questions, directions, anything like that? Councillor Haas?
Yeah, I'm just looking for, because I know there was in here, there isn't a recommendation in the listing, but to make a direction to go forward with the low income program. I'm just looking for some wording that would help me with what you need as administration for that.
Option 2, council.
Oh, is it up?
Yeah.
Oh, my apologies.
That's okay.
Okay, so I'd like to move the committee accepts the park and recreation user fee supplement information for information, and that the committee directs administration to include the LIRAP program within the fee schedule to be represented for approval at the December 17th, 2024 regular council meeting. If I can quickly speak to it.
Please.
you know, I'm happy with the information, but I think that going forward with this, low income, you know, it's been successful increase of ridership, with our bus system. You know, it can increase the foot traffic in our facility, and it does increase revenue somewhat, if successful. So I think for doing it for one program, I think it's reasonable we do it for a program such as this as well. So, thank you.
Council, we do have a consensus request on the floor. Speaker's queue is empty. Any comments, questions? Seeing none, we will look to call the question that committee accepts the Parks, Recreation and Culture User Fee Supplemental Information Report for information, and that committee directs administration to include the LIRAP program with the fee, within the fee schedule to be presented for approval at the December 17th, 2024 regular council meeting. Call the question, council, if you can please vote now. Councillor Taylor voting opposed.
I'm in favor. It's not showing up. I'm not sure what's going on.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ostashik in favor. That is carried 5-1 with Councillor Taylor against. Council, any further discussion on that before we move on to the next action item? I do just have a follow-up for administration. I anticipate the answer will be yes. Giving this program about a year, is it the plan of administration to come back and revisit the program, establish sort of a baseline for how effective it was and what potential changes might or not might be in the program?
Yes, thank you for that question. That's correct. As you know, the fees will be reviewed regularly, so at that point, we'll bring back some additional information on how the program's going.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Particularly if your assumption that the program is gonna operate on a profit when it operates on a loss.
We'll be bringing back the information regardless, that's right.
Okay, this was voted on the assumption that it's gonna make money.
Council, any further discussion on this before we move on to the next action item? Seeing none, we will move on to use of the Gateway to the Rockies administration.
Thank you, Chair. I will turn this one over to Ms. Bordeaux.
Thank you, and through to our committee this evening. The communications unit is currently looking at undertaking an internal brand strengthening exercise and therefore bringing the Gateway to the Rockies slogan forward to committee for discussion. The slogan has been in use since early 1980s, if not before that. Past research has identified that the slogan was supported locally and that it identified Hinton's location, excuse me, as their location in close proximity to the Rocky Mountains. The slogan's also been met with some criticism that it reflects that Hinton is a drive-through point, not a destination. While the organization once had the slogan trademarked for use, any trademark rights have expired. And should the committee proceed with the recommended action this evening, electronic use of the slogan would cease upon adoption of the updated visual identity guides, with physical assets containing the slogan would only be replaced at the end of the useful life. So we're not anticipating any costs associated with changing the physical assets because that will happen over time. So administration is before committee this evening looking for direction on whether we discontinue or continue with the use of the slogan Gateway to the Rockies. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you. I have myself in queue. And I apologize because I'm chairing and I'm not necessarily, unless I surrender the chair, can make any consensus requests. But for consideration and discussion, I still remember one of the biggest points of contention that Edmonton City Council has dealt with in the past number of years was when they had decided to drop the City of Champions logo from a lot of the work that they had done. So I guess I also understand the point from administration that a refreshing of the brand might be appropriate. I guess for council's consideration, I think this might actually be something that's better placed at the start of a new council's term. And that maybe revisiting this as part of the strategic initiative of a new council might actually be better place. That was something that I sort of talked about in the last week. But again, I'll see what consensus hit the table before going much further than that. Thanks. Councillor Taylor.
Is this part of our, I'm not clear on why we're doing this now. We, did we vote to give money to do a rebranding? No, we didn't, or did we?
If I may, through to all of committee, so the rebranding operational business case that was before council and committee for discussion on the budget was not put
Oh,
forward
yeah.
to the budget. There was discussion that we could consider it if we could find grant funding for it. In conversation with the comm staff, it's very unlikely we would find any grant that would cover that full funding. So they are simply bringing this forward as an opportunity to do some internal strengthening of the brand without going through an entire rebranding exercise.
Councillor O'Stasher.
Mr. Chair, I have a question and then depending on the answer, I might speak to it.
Please.
So not seeing any options for other slogans that might be implemented in place of Gateway to the Rockies. Is the strategy to just not have a slogan on any of the town branding if this motion would pass?
Through to all committee, that would be it, as we're not going through with the full rebranding or taking that exercise to any great length. It would be to just remove the slogan of Gateway to the Rockies. And leave it with nothing until such time as we're doing a full rebranding.
I could
Please.
speak to it then?
Yep.
Yeah, I actually wouldn't be in favor of removing Gateway to the Rockies then as the official town slogan unless there was something to that council or committee could direct administration to move forward with the replacement. I think it kind of is important to have a slogan as part of the branding package. I don't particularly see that there's anything wrong with Gateway to the Rockies. It is what we are. It's the transition between the prairies and the foothills to the Rocky Mountains. I think it's adequately appropriate until there's something else that's supported by council of the day. So seeing that, I'd like to seek consensus of committee to accept this report as information. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor O'Stasher. Council, any discussion, Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, and I'll be supporting the consensus on the floor right now. I tend to agree with Councilor Stashik. We're literally describing the geographic feature in the rock. Entrance is called entrance because it is the entrance to the Rockies. And looking at our branding package here, I actually quite like the vast majority of our logos, but I would suggest to administration if we were going to take a look at any one to update, the Dr. Duncan Murray Recreation Center logo definitely looks like it's still living in the 80s to me. But we'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council, any further discussion on the consensus request on the floor? Seeing none, then I will call the question that committee accepts this report for information. Council, if you can please vote now. Councillor Taylor voting in favor.
I'm in favor
Thank
as well.
Perfect, Councillor O'Stasher in favor. And that would bring us to everybody, unanimous consent, unanimously in favor. Thank you, council. Council, any further discussion on that? Seeing none, then we will move on to item 4.3, Hinton Recreation Center Condition and Viability Assessment Fees. Admin.
Chair, I will turn this over to Mr. McLaughlin.
Good evening, council. So before you tonight is the condition and viability interim report or a technical memo, as we have called it. Back in beginning of April, council made the motion to direct administration to do a condition and viability assessment on the rec center. And so we engaged Associated Engineering to do this study. And as part of their deliverables was to get you something before budget so that you could have in the back of your minds at least, you know, somewhat of a direction of where we were going while reviewing budget. So They did deliver on that, and we got this out to you, by email, but we never got a chance to bring it to the table till tonight to, hear your inputs into the document. We're here tonight to basically, get feedback on the document and, provide any direction before Associated begins, completing the assignment. To date, the report that's in front of you has been pretty much a desk study. They haven't done any field work coming and actually looking at the asset. That would be the next stage of the study, would be to bring out their professionals and actually go through the facility and do these, the on-site assessments. And, with that, I'll take any questions and have a discussion.
Council. Mr. Mayor.
Seeing as this is an opportunity for administration to seek feedback from the council, I'd just like to put out there that in the future assessment scenarios, I myself am most interested, considering the ice plant, in pursuing one of the exterior ice plants rather than upgrading or repairing the facility that we have currently existing indoors. From all of the reports we've had at this point, it sounds to me like that's the way to go for us either way. So from that standpoint, unless council is opposed, I would suggest to administration that taking a look at the rehabilitation of the indoor ice plant facility is probably not a good use of resources at this time. And then I understand that some of the work listed in this package may have been completed or maybe be in the works now. Can you extrapolate on any of those items in this report that we may have already moved on?
I'm not understanding.
Sorry, did
the
we?
question.
I think there's a couple of items in here that are costed out, but we've actually started to make progress towards moving through the budget. Am I mistaken?
No, like, certainly the ice plant is one of them.
Yeah.
Which other ones are you referring to?
Were there some heaters or the mud jacking, I think, for the pool perhaps? Or was that a separate item altogether?
We're not doing anything with the mud jacking. We do have some boiler replacements that's in your current budget that we're proceeding with. As well as, I think there was the overhead heaters in the arena and yeah, those.
Okay, and the mud jacking then, was the mud jacking what we did with the water slide installation, or was that for something that's has yet to be managed?
We did some concreting, with the installation of the slide, and we talked about mud jacking because we were talking about some voids that we know about under the pool deck.
Okay.
But we haven't done any mud jacking to address any of that type of
Okay,
stuff. We just did what we needed to do around this water slide.
okay, thank you.
Councilor Taylor.
This wasn't actually what I expected. I expected a similar report to the one we got, I forget what year it was, 2014. Where the actual condition of the thing was assessed. We got somebody to look at the structure and they made comments on the structure. They actually looked at the structure. They didn't just do a paper exercise. They looked at the maintenance costs. And over the long term, we got long-term maintenance costs. They looked at the downtime and how that had changed over time. That's what I was actually expecting. So to not have that done, and then to go into this report, that then is a paper exercise that goes into the costs of trying to replace somebody in the future, seems to be missing critical information that we should have started with. Because the only thing in here that has to be fixed, there's two items that have to be fixed, $25,000 for, we got mud jacking and $75,000 to lean up help support a wall. Other than that, that's the critical stuff that has to be fixed. But in 2014-17, I think it was Williams Engineering came and did this report. And at that time, the report said the structure was basically sound and would last another 10 years with periodic inspections. And they gave us maintenance data that showed the maintenance costs were $150,000 per year. This says the maintenance costs are gonna be $3 million per year, so pretty confused.
Through the chair to Councillor Taylor, so this is the sort of the start of the study, and that we wanted to get this to you before budget, as I stated, they haven't brought out their professionals and looked at the buildings yet, that's the next phase of this study, and if you proceed to continue completing the report, that is the next step, is they would come out and actually crawl through the building and look at everything, as well as meet with our staff, and get input on, you know, how the facility's meeting the needs, and this will get turned into a much thicker report. And this was just an interim report to give you some information before budget. The remainder of the report would come in Q1.
CAO.
Thank you, Chair. And just for council, and a big driving force of bringing this forward was we needed to look at, or we needed some projections on the costing in order to look at the options that we have when it comes to the new recreation center. So having this at more of a high level and looking at what these scenarios are going to be and some projected costs, but we've done quite a few of this. We've done quite a few studies like the one that was just mentioned. So the desktop exercise was not just, you know, making high level projections. It was actually based on a lot of good detailed information that we already have. So, you know, I think it's, you know, the information that we have is good, and they were able to just see what was done, what wasn't, and what, you know, what make some assumptions based on all of those previous studies. But, you know, one of the things that we looked at, and, you know, I think Mr. McLaughlin touched on it, but the further we go down, if we want to go, you know, continue with this study, it's looking at, you know, all of the details and, you know, what should be replaced and exactly when. But right now, what we're looking at is just a high level projection that gives you maybe some information when it comes to, you know, the future of what the recreation center could look like and what those costs are going to be for all of the different options. So, you know, I think that intent, I think it's captured that on a long-term horizon, but just something to consider. That was part of the reason that we had included in the option of we could look at this study as the stopping point. I think we spent about 30 of the 100. And if we just wanted to look at the high level scenarios of the what we want to do with the recreation centers, we could look at this as a stopping point and not go through all those detailed asset management plan for the facility.
Thank you, CAO. I have myself up next, Councillor Hawes and Councillor Race. Specific to the report itself, and I just want to confirm a few things to make sure I'm understanding it properly. So on page 14 of 19 of the attached report, when it talks about scenario 3, the new build, and understanding that's a super high level estimate, is putting it in at $102.1 million. I just need to confirm that before I carry on. Is that so? Essentially, the high level estimate from the firm is we anticipate 102.1 to build a brand new facility, with our current facility operating in the meantime while this is going on.
That's correct.
Correct? Okay. Now because it's always the devil's in the details of keeping the lights on. With the operations, with the 2 columns, it says the existing rec center is, we anticipate there to be a net increase of about $700,000 a year to the operating cost of that new facility comparative to the old facility, correct? 3 million compared to 3.7 million.
Which page of the package?
So of the report, page 14 of 19, the report from the engineering firm.
57.
Yeah, I apologize, Trent, it's not all listed in one set of page numbers for us.
Page 57.
57
Okay.
is what it sounds like.
So you're asking for confirmation of the 102?
No, right now, just the confirmation that we're looking at an increase of $700,000 to operation costs per year, given, a new build out. 3 million, current 3.7 million moving forward with the new build. Under operations and maintenance.
What table number are you?
So this is table, it's start 4-5. It's divided over 2 pages. It's the second page. And it says operation and maintenance, O&M.
Page 51.
Yeah, that's how I would read that, yeah, that's correct, 700,000 difference, and, I know that is often, something that towns experience, is that when they build the new facility, often the higher operating cost is not something they always have planned for, but that is something that has surprised a lot of communities.
Okay, perfect. I'll go back in queue for right now. Councillor Haas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess my understanding, because I had a question to our CEO during our budget discussions. Because my understanding, when we had our last strategic plan, there was a lot of conversation around the rec center, which started off this study to see what the existing building is. So when I didn't see it in the budget package for this year, I had a question, and by what I understand is administration, if we continue forward with this, it's administration's intent to bring back to council, I'm assuming with the full report, and then a more in-depth conversation around, you know, the future of the financing and, you know, the future of budgeting and things of that nature. So is that the intent of administration if council were wanting to go forward with, continued with this study, that we would then either see it in our strategic plan, update, or it would be a separate, matter discussed?
Chair, yeah, if I could, I think, you know, and I think the technical memo is accomplish what we need from a high level strategic discussion when it comes to, you know, we really have 3 very high level scenarios, right? We're going all the way to a new build. We're just looking at a new asset and then just maintaining what we have. So when it comes from there, I think, you know, we have a lot of what we need from a strategic and a financial standpoint. You know, my understanding is that the next stages of this study is really going to be diving down into the existing facility and an asset management plan for the existing facility, if that's what we would like. And, you know, what do we need to replace and when, and getting down into the finer details of what we have. But when it comes, and then, you know, if there's any other direction or some different orientation to the scenarios 2 and 3, we could bring that forward. But, you know, when it comes down to making a decision on, you know, what financial plan do we want to put in place for what scenario, I think we have a lot of those answers in the existing tech memo, but we do plan on bringing this forward for spring for further discussion.
Okay, if I could follow up then, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, please.
So regardless, I think whether or not my thought is, I mean, upon those initial conversations in our last strategic plan meeting around this item, I recall administration saying like, we're still 10 years out, you know, whether it become to financing and all the other things that we need to do, you know, so realistically, we still need to rely on this existing structure for at least 10 years or more, because then there's the construction time if we were to go with either new or something different. But that, I think, is essential to know what those assets are in there, because then it will also help us to minimize the cost potentially of keeping that old building going, depending on what we're gonna be spending on the new and what those decisions are. So without that, we'd be really not having the great detail on the existing structure so that we can prioritize what's really needed to keep those doors open versus what could wait. Am I on the right track with that?
Yes, I would say you are, and just so I'm clear about what you're saying is, you know, based on the scenario we pick, looking at an asset management plan that suits the term that we're looking at and the option. So if we want a new greenfield build, that asset management plan might look a little bit different than, you know, obviously scenario one, where our priority is to keep this building alive and running in good shape for a very long period of time. Is that where?
Yeah, that's what I'm,
Okay.
if I may, because the flavor I felt in the last strategic plan is we wanted to move forward with something with the rec center. We've been sitting on it way too long. We want to have some sort of plan moving forward, you know, so we need to have all the details first, I think, especially, you know, and then we can come up with an asset plan if we were to either do a rebuild or something, you know, of that sort. We need to know what that's gonna look like, what the costs are gonna look like as well. So, I'll leave it at that. There's others in the queue. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through the chair to administration. So this motion was made April 2nd, so now we're 8 months later and we're getting a paper report. Is that normal timeline for something like this?
Through the chair, yeah, relatively, yeah.
And so if we did move ahead with the physical, how long would it be before we got that physical report?
Through the chair to Councillor Race, I think that we would be bringing you the final report by the end of the Q1. So April-ish, you would see full report.
Thank you.
Councillor Taylor, then myself.
These numbers in here, these are the current value. Like, it doesn't say what the future value, current value, whether they be discounted, compounded. So these are the 2024 costs. They've all been discounted to current date.
That's correct. It's not future value.
In fact, that the first paragraph in 3.2 says that. It says all costs presented in this memo are in $2,024.
Okay, good. I read that while I was writing.
My question for admin is, so moving forward with that future spring conversation, that the CAO had indicated, are we anticipating that the flavor of that conversation will be getting council to the point where they can make a more defined, decision about, are we talking about a greenfield build? Are we talking about rehabbing? Are we talking about, you know, expansion to the existing facility?
Yeah, through the chair, you know. My priority in the decision that I see we need to get to is picking a high level scenario and implementing the corresponding financial plan. If scenario, you know, whichever scenario we decide, I think we need a target to aim at. And this is a long-term thing. These things don't happen overnight. It's slow, but we need to implement a financial plan now if we want options in, you know, in the future. So, but we need something to aim at, and we need to, you know, because the numbers are, you know, they're not drastically different when you're looking at over a very long period of time, but they are different, and that is going to change, you know, the financial plan and even what we need to do in, you know, the next year or next two years. So that is the plan. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. Councillor Haas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm gonna move that council endorse the Associated Engineering Technical Memorandum Project 2024-3059 as presented. And I have a clarifying question.
Please.
So with this direction, it is then the intent that the project, the Associated Engineers would go to the next step and continue the in-depth analysis of it. And then that will bring back to the spring a fulsome report and then discussion on financials and things like that. So with the nodding of the head, then I see that this is essential. If we're gonna have this conversation in this term, this has gotta happen, and it at least also sets up for whatever next council, you know, with those numbers and those discussions to continue that conversation if this council doesn't necessarily move on anything, but, you know, again, I think this is a matter that's been in front of many councils and, you know, and the building is getting worse. The community that I talk to are interested in some, different service in that area. What that's gonna look like will also be around the cost, so then we can have a more fulsome conversation with the community, so, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. Council, we do have a consensus request on the floor. I have no one in the speaker's queue. We'll give you one last chance. Any, discussion on that? Seeing none, then we will call the question. That committee endorse the Associated Engineering Technical Memorandum Project 2024-3059 as presented. Council, if you can please vote now. Councillor Taylor in favor, Councillor Stashik, are you
In favor.
in favor? So that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much, Councillor Taylor.
This money, this is already money in the budget. We've already
That's
planned for this.
Yes.
Okay. Just one more point.
Please.
I know nobody agrees with me on this, but I'm gonna say it anyways. Just as an aside on a good way to proceed, I would go ahead and get this report, get the condition report, flush out 3 options, put it to the public during the next election as you have 3 options, what to do. Here's the cost of what these options are. And get the public's take on it, especially if we're gonna go with the flushed out full cost option. That's what I think will make this more than just another one of 10 reports that we already have on this topic. Is the backing of the public on an option that we've selected, and that's something that we've consistently missed. And that was something that the 2012 council saw that was going to be important.
I'll actually speak to that comment. I think for the most part, I actually agree, Councillor Taylor. I think we have an opportune time to incorporate that into the election, and potentially that might become a platform issue for some people. So I'll leave those comments there. Council, anything further on that before we move forward? Mr. McLaughlin.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on, one of the things that Councillor Taylor mentioned is, yes, this is in the budget, but it is being funded out of the recreation center reserve. I think that needs to be clear that it was council's decision to fund it out of there.
Did you have a follow-up, Councillor Taylor?
But just that it's an awful lot of money, like that's like hiring somebody almost for a full year to do a report. So what are they gonna do for all that money?
They're going to come here with very expensive people and go through the building in very fine detail and produce a report. The motion was to do it with 200,000. We managed to get them, the agreement is for 107, and we've spent 30 so far. So that tells you where we're at. I think we did a good job bringing the cost down from what the motion was. But yes,
I didn't realize the cost was that.
but it is expensive.
Council, anything else before we move on? Seeing none, then we will move on to item 4.4, infill land development, recapitulation, options and opportunities, and I said it, I feel good about it. No, Stu, clarification, elementary now, so expectations there.
Chair, I will turn this over to Mr. Russo.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Council, and good evening. And this report is before you tonight, and it emanates back to February the 24th and the 25th, where we had the workshop in Jasper. And just to go back to what that agenda said at the time, when we brought it forward to you in February, we were looking at land strategies. And out of the land strategies, we were going to prioritize with council return lands, inventory of developable lands, which consists of commercial and industrial land opportunities. Infill was one of those line items. And then town-owned contaminated lands, which we often refer to as brownfield. And then, of course, crown land acquisition conversation was had at the time. Out of that conversation, in summary, the infill land opportunities were sort of the marching orders we got besides Bhutan lands, which is running parallel, which is not under the discussion tonight as a report. So with that background, what administration has done between then and this evening, we've looked at the town-owned lands. And as we all are aware, we don't have a ton of land that is lying out there. We've got 9 parcels, of which is town-owned. Within those 9 parcels, we basically tiered it to say tier 1 and tier 2, of which tier 1 would basically resemble, there's some simple approaches to take forward, which we'll get into in a second. Tier 2 will take a little bit of more sort of muscle power to get that marketable, and the cost attached to that may have to be discussed over time. Not to hold up the file, we wanted to bring this to council so that we can have a fuller discussion regarding what can we move forward likely that is lower hanging fruit and that we could put to market. So we've seen over time that we've even done some appraisals on some of these land parcels that we have. So we understand what the market value is of them once we go to realtors to see what the market is holding in comparison to the appraisal values. So what you have before you tonight is what we've looked at, what could be the ideal uses? What is the current zoning? So if you go to Annexure A or Annexure 1, you'll see that that's where the land parcels are basically outlined in terms of the tiers. At the same time, we've given you what the zoning is. And we took some bold steps to say, how can we potentially have a really good discussion tonight and land on a potential option that we could bring back to council for hopefully verification and in a short order, take that to market and see what it will bear. So having spoken about options, the first option that we have, if you take these 9 parcels and the tier 1 more specifically, we could go out on an expression of interest. And as council is well familiar with an expression of interest, this is where we'll take the 9 parcels or part thereof and say, the town has the following parcels at the appraised value or at the market value of X and Y, and we are willing to enter into a proponent that can come forward, demonstrate how we within a specific period of time can satisfy some of the things that we know, i.e. housing, be it commercial or a combination of both. And within that EOI, you could then have sort of preferences to what we want to see. Is it multi-units? Is it the, various incentives can go with that? And I do just want to caution or maybe be specific about incentives. Doesn't mean that every one of those parcels will have the same incentive. It depends on the scale, it depends on timelines, and how quickly we can get to market and help Hinton to start developing at a rate that would be much more favorable than what we see today. So the EOI, as we're well familiar, I'm not going to get into the details of it, but we'll put some criteria attached to it, put it out to the open market, select with council's approval what those parcels could be, or what is it all mine, or is it part thereof? Option 2, we can basically go to a public auction, and we can have a reserve bid on it, and we can put out all the parcels, part thereof, or none of them. Option 3 is a list of properties that we could maybe work with certain realtors or with our realtors in town, get them to market it on our behalf or facilitate the inquiries that could come from that. We could put these properties on our website, could go onto their website, and we could maybe adopt the process that the government of Alberta does. And it's as simple as these parcels are uploaded onto our site, then it directs you to the preferred realtors that we've selected in the town, and they will manage the process as if somebody's inquiring about private land, and then come back to us and say, we have an offer. You want to accept it? What are your conditions? And we'll make go forward and backward, and then eventually have an offer and purchase sale agreement in place. The other option is option 4. You can have vendor financing. This is a little bit of a risk when it comes to that the town is maybe putting its foot outside the comfort zone, where you basically allow the land to land in the lap of a developer. Financing has not been finalized, and that could be done over time. However, we would register a mortgage on the sale of the house to secure the payment. If things go sideways in that respect, well, we know foreclosing and all of those things are expensive and not palatable. And so we may want to we've had to put that in there because certain municipalities and we have undertaken such projects quite successfully. So it's not that it's a total no. Option 5 is we're suggesting we could have a pilot project. So you could, as for example, and we are not saying it should be McLeod 201 or known as Laurel Square, as a project because it's zoned appropriately residential. We know we have a housing need for multi-units. We could put that out, test the market, put some incentives attached to it, conditions, And we could use that as a very good pilot, which is almost like a prototype that we have. Then we could go scale it up. Or we may get such an appetite from developers coming to our town, lining up, wanting to do stuff, that the incentives could be lowered, the combination of timelines, other than putting everything out there. Having said that, the development incentives that we've listed here is not exhausted. You could have a combination of them, you could have one or two of them, or you could have it sort of stratified throughout the development process as you develop the development agreement, etc. So there's lots of ways we could tweak that, put it together, mix it up, and make it palatable for both the town as well as for the preferred developer. So that's the info lines that we have. And I want to pause there before I get into the different segment over to you, Mr. Chair.
Sounds good. Councillor Haas.
Yeah, I'm just interested, a little bit on the, realtor. Being as how, by the sounds of it, the only parcel of land currently is the Laurel Square that's zoned. Everything else would have to be kind of rezoned. So is it, administration's also recommendation that if we were to say go the realtor way, to rezone that before it would go on market? Because then, you know, it adds another step of, you know, then rezoning, and then what if we don't rezone, and it's, you know, so is it administration's intent to bring that forward to rezone before that, if that was the decision of council?
Through the chair, Councillor Haas. Of course, the idea here with this report is to expedite and facilitate development. So in order to expedite it, it would be best to have a property that is zoned already in accordance with what the development could be.
Yeah.
For any investor, as such that anything that goes over a period of 12 to 18 months, you've lost them.
Yeah.
So the intent would be, if this is the will of council, we will then go ahead and say, we'll rezone in accordance to what we'd like to see.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So page 59, option 1, underneath the 4 bullets there, it talks about a scoring matrix could be developed with council input. Why do you need our input? Are we, you know, are we overstepping there, or how involved do we need to be in developing a matrix?
Through the chair to Councillor Rice. The ask here or the comment here is not to have you come into the kitchen of administration. It is basically to give you a progress update and the inputs that you may solicit and have a thought of this, and maybe it may be good input, but it's not that we're seeking your endorsement of it. Once we have your endorsement of an expression of interest before it goes to public, we will share it with you. This is what's going to be part of it. And you will say, I think we've got a good package, subject to just add this or not, and it's basically a courtesy to you. As
Okay.
council.
Can I go back and do this?
I have myself in next. You can go right now, Councillor Race.
Okay.
Sorry,
Thank you.
Chair, if I could just
Yeah,
add to that a little
please,
bit.
CAO.
One of the things and one of the reasons that we spoke about a scoring matrix is because these aren't really straightforward parcels like a private developer where, you know, if we were a private corporation and we were selling it, our priority is to get the most amount of money for that parcel. Because once it's sold and we no longer own it. As a municipality, it's a little bit different, and what we wanna try to do with that scoring matrix is extract from council what is really important to you, because, you know, council might orientate themselves towards, we want to maximize how much money we're getting for these parcels. Or council may prioritize, we wanna see development because, you know, housing is a part of our strategic plan. It may be a mixture of both. If, you know, there's a whole bunch of different priorities that council can have. You know, if this is just a straightforward sale, we don't need council to be involved in developing a matrix. We would just, you know, sell it. It's pretty straightforward. It's, you know, whoever bids the highest is gonna get the parcel. But, you know, if we wanna look at this from a, you know, and even make more of a long-term perspective, what's gonna give us the highest assessment over time, right? It may not just be what we get immediately, it might be, you know, our benefit over 10-year payback, for example. So there's a lot of different priorities we can have, and by sitting down together as a team and making sure that we're clear on the priorities of why we want to sell, I think it'll just, you know, we can actually accomplish those goals that we're setting up to.
And I appreciate that. I think we really do have to take a look at why we wanna sell. So I appreciate what you said. So my other question was, does any of this involve P2s, P3s?
To the chair to Councillor Rice, at this point, we haven't identified or defined it as, it depends on, again, just here with Vanessa said, what models, what criteria we put in. And if that's the will of council and the appetite, absolutely, it could resemble P2, P3, whatever their definition may be at the time.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I have myself and Councillor Taylor. I guess, in speaking to the options, I'll start there and then I'll sort of see how far down we should drill. For myself, option 1 and option 5 is a question. I'm seeing them as similar in a lot of ways, you know, putting out an EOI and seeing who comes back and says, yeah, we think we can achieve these goals with you based on what you put out for an expression of interest. Could be, something that's also achieved by a pilot project where you get specific to a parcel of land. And again, you're looking for bids maybe at market price or slightly below, depending on how we make sure we communicate our potential sales options. So I'll hit pause there. Is that correct to assume that those could coexist as options for the town and that they could be blended together or they could work in isolation?
To the chair, is that the idea of the EOI in option 1 was to take multiple parcels.
Yeah.
And then to put a criterion and matrix to that as to how each parcel would be scored with the relevant incentives. Whereas with option 5, would be you take one and you'd be specific about what you're wanting to see within a specific timeline, which would somewhat be part of option 1, but you're more specific.
Okay, so then I will speak, and again, I apologize, being the chair is odd, for myself, I'm supportive of option 1. I'm not really supportive that much of options 2, 3, 4, and knowing that 5. 2, 3, and 4, just selling the parcel for the sake of potentially having a parcel sit in a vendor's hands without a lot of terms and conditions around it, it concerns me. I think having a vision and being able to say to a potential vendor, look, we want to build an apartment building block and we're willing to partner with you. And here's how we can sweeten the pot to make that happen. What can you do for us? And being able to communicate that as an end goal clearly, I think that's beneficial. We may actually be able to bring in vendors from outside of Hinton who might be able to contribute to that kind of project. It's specific, it has a purpose, and then it terminates. I think that's more effective than simply saying, hey, do you want to buy this land? You know what I mean? Then it becomes nebulous for myself. I'll leave it there. There's a lot more conversation, I think. Councillor Taylor.
Part of the trouble I see with infill is like a lot of these are, there's like established green areas and you know, people like their green areas, and a couple of these in particular, we've had lots of people show up at public meetings as soon as we try to do something to it. So, my fear would be that we do a whole bunch of work and then we would face that and then everything would collapse. So how do we overcome that? Is that the question of maybe doing the zoning first before you do anything else, figure out what you want? But then if you do the zoning, then that's you're telling the developer, you're guessing what the developer wants to put on the land. So that's problematic that way. But doing a lot of work and then watching it collapse because you get a ton of public opposition, which I've seen happen to at least 2 of these parcels from councils that I've sat on. They could have been developed by now and I've watched them go up. How do we deal with that without doing a bunch of work that wasted?
Yeah. So through to the chair to Councillor Taylor, one of the reasons we've given you these options 1 to 5 was exactly to say you've got park zoned. How much of that do you want to sacrifice for development? Or you could go 1 parcel at a time, which is zoned appropriately, and look at the appetite that would be returned towards the incentives that we may want to add to it, and will be a combination thereof. So we are conscious of it that you will have in certain of these lands, you will have questions, and you will have to be able to answer those questions while we're sacrificing park. The aim of the infill strategy was to just put zoning aside for a moment, which lands do we have that the town owns? And so we've never had the discussion to unpack, I said, how much green space do we want to sacrifice for the sake of development? So that conversation can be further unpacked depending on which option you choose to go forward with.
I have myself, then Councillor Hawes. I guess, you know, expanding on that notion of land, it's the greatest thing they're not making anymore. If it was the will of council, understanding that that's the limiting factor, right? How much land that the town controls. Is it within the bounds of council, even though this isn't a traditional role, certainly for Hinton, to look for EOIs that position us as a strategic partner in development, where we say, look, we could also look at parcels of land that are currently for sale, that the town is willing to invest as a partner, and then, of course, that brings with it a list of caveats about deliverables. Is that something that we could look at strategically as well at this stage of the game? Because then we have the opportunity to explore more strategic land that might be more desirable or developable from an outside developer.
Yeah, and through the chair to members of council, you can, maybe keep that thought in mind when we, discuss the municipally controlled corporation, because I think that fits in well within how we want to orientate ourselves on and how we want to implement this, but that is an option, that is something you can do.
Okay, so just for clarification, before I move to Councillor Hawes, in choosing, say, option one, that then doesn't exclude that as an option later on down the line. Like to go through, if that was something the town wanted to do as well within a municipal development corporation.
Yeah, through the chair, if we decide that we want to move forward, with maybe some more specific partnerships, you know, that could be incorporated into the EOI once a corporation would be established, and it depends, and this is a nuanced discussion because it depends a lot about how exactly we want to partner and whether you need this or not, but we can, you know, we can speak about that a little bit more, but, you know, if it is the will of council to look at more of a, you know, an active involvement in the project itself, we could incorporate that into the EOI.
Thank you. Councillor Hawes.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about, because just building off of some of Councillor Magoon's questions and around option 3. So I have no interest too of just putting land up for a vendor to buy, because we've done that before and they buy it and then they do nothing with it. But if option 3 with list of properties with a realtor, that doesn't stop us from putting conditions on the sale of the land, right? Like we can still, because we've done that with others, if nothing is done by X amount of time, then we can opt to buy it back. So there are some still conditions and options with some of these others that isn't option 1, correct?
Correct, and just to reiterate, and maybe I haven't said it, therefore I'm saying it now, to be clear, option 1 to 5 all comes with conditions, meaning that if the minute we release our land to a private entity, if they want to sit on it for 10 years, that's not an option.
Right.
The condition would be in X time, be it under 5-year period. If you haven't done X and Y, the land is clawed back to a town-owned asset.
Because if I may follow up with that, and I mean, I'm not convinced on any of them yet, but you know, when I look at the fact of giving this to realtors have a very long arm in the world of real estate and who's looking for what. And, you know, one of the things that we've always struggled with is getting people to come and consider that land. So I mean, I see some benefits to listing properties with the realtor, because it's in their best interest as well to sell that land, you know, because one, it could be beneficial to the real estate market for them. It could be, you know, so and they have those connections, whether it's with developers or with, you know, private developers or bigger developers. So, you know, the fact that we can put conditions on it and, you know, try something different that we've never tried before, you know, that intrigues me, to be honest with you. So, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, and then Councillor Ostashik.
Thank you, and through the chair to committee, and to administration, I'd like to thank you for the report. I think it's very, very good informative report. I think that there's some more reports coming on this topic, and there are some situations with the rebuild of the community next door. There's a number of decisions that are yet to be made from provincial, federal, potential partner levels, and just the people who are displaced and looking for housing. I think that this is a very great discussion. I would like to see us postpone this discussion into the new year, though. I think we're unlikely to make good property management decisions 2 weeks before Christmas, and I think there is more information that we have yet to come on this topic. At a minimum, I'd like to see it come back as strategic planning, or, potentially before that point. But at this point, I like to look at this report, and I'd like to see consensus that the committee accept the report for information at this time.
We'll let, Ms. Stevie Campbell capture that. Councillor Stashik, would you care to speak?
Yeah, I speak to the direction request, sure, since that's what's on the table now.
Please.
I won't be supporting that direction request at this time. I think this is something that's an imminent need in town. It was in imminent need even before the Jasper wildfire situation. I think it's important that committee and council choose a path to expedite this and other initiatives that can help get some residential properties constructed and on the market in Hinton. That's the only reason that I wouldn't support having this brought back at some point in the future or accepting it for information. I think we need to take a look at this and make some decisions to drive residential development forward. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Stashik. Yeah, for myself, I won't repeat any of the same things that Councillor Stashik had mentioned, but additionally, I think it behooves us to provide administration with direction moving forward out of this, and I think it aligns with some of our strategic initiatives, so I'll be voting in the same vein. Council, any other discussion on, Edmund?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I can just continue, I'll pause there because there's actually a second part to this report.
Please.
So thank you for the opportunity. So on the report, we've also suggested that we have a look at a process or a policy that we start looking at and implementing parallel to wherever council lands. And I'll just preface this where this is coming from. We get a lot of land acquisition or interest in land, and we don't have a process or a policy through which that gets vetted before it even becomes. So we could be wasting a proposed developer's time, or we could be enabling them through a policy process that is open and friendly and business-like. And so that is what we are seeking as well in terms of the consensus that on the table, the council also endorse, or that refers to a future meeting that we bring forward and enact a policy or work on a policy process that will enable and facilitate development going forward for town lands.
Council, any questions on Councillor Race?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, you know what, I don't wanna say no to what you are proposing to postpone this, because it sounds to me, and maybe you could elaborate, that something is, we will be speaking about something in the near future. So, I'm kind of torn right now. So, are you able to say that we will be having a discussion that may be pertinent to this?
Mr. Mayor, before somebody in queue, seeing as it was a direct question, if you care to respond.
I believe that our line discussion in closed session, in this committee meeting pertains to these types of situations, and that information is pertinent to our decision going forward. Again, I'm in support of moving this project forward. I don't believe the committee currently has sufficient information to choose an option today.
And sorry, here's where I'm torn. We, and I say we as a whole, if we don't move this ahead, we're gonna delay it, nothing's gonna get done. Nothing's gonna get done. But then, if I know that there's more information coming that is pertinent to this conversation, I don't wanna rush this before I hear.
I have Councillor Hawes in queue. and then Ostache.
Yeah, I won't be in favor of the direction on the table. I think putting a pause on this, sure, things might happen, but they can happen in parallel. There's other lands, there's other things. So I think, you know, this doesn't stop us from any future endeavors that may come down our way. I think I agree that, you know, pushing pause just delays it further, and this has been long coming and we haven't seen, you know, anything like this before, and I think this is a very promising report with a lot of great options in it. And I don't wanna pause it at this moment. I want Mr. Russo and his department to continue the work on this. And we'll wait and see what happens. I don't wanna do it on what ifs, so, thank you.
Councillor Ostache, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's important that committee recognizes that administration's not actually looking for which of those options that are the preferred option to move forward with today. Their recommended action is simply that this comes forward. Comes forward to a future committee of the whole meetings discussed. So if I can look to administration, you're not actually looking for any direction on a preferred option today, are you?
Mr. Chair.
Please, yeah.
Correct, Councillor Stashik. The idea was that's why we have it put as a red to a future council, which means that if you chose option A, B, or 1 or 2, then that was what we're going to bring and further unpack to help you make that decision. So.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ostache. Council, any further discussion on the direct, Councillor Reyes?
I do, thank you, Mr. Chair. So are you saying you would like us to say, this is the preferred option, I would like option 1, I'd like option 5? Is that what you're saying?
If the conversation was that there was a consent to the chair to the council, then yes, there was an option that would come out of it. We would then further explore and unpack it based on the details that you've asked us to begin. But the motion reads, or the consensus reads, that you would like to see this come back and maybe further unpack what we've talked about tonight, so it's the ball stays in play.
Oh, okay.
We're not doing anything.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Councillor Taylor?
We'll just further unpack this comes forward, so we bring this and you bring what extra do you bring?
We've had a lot of conversation, and we don't have direction from you with option 1 or 5 tonight. But we bring it back and we will say to you, okay, here's what the appraisal land values are, here's what we're recommending on each, so that you can actually then make saying, we as administration recommend the following. We didn't make a recommendation. We wanted to share with you 5 options tonight because the file hasn't been back since February. And as I said in my opening statement, we extracted info from land strategies. So tonight was to refresh you and to bring more updated information or options to you. We are not sort of forcing you to make an optional choice.
Not tonight.
Yeah, not tonight. But this will come back to you at a future committee of the whole. And so we can discuss the options, more details attached to it.
And I have myself in queue next, and so I'm gonna request the CAO to confirm. Councillor Taylor, part of the agenda, prep committee's discussions were that it wasn't just this item and potentially the other items in tonight's agenda also sort of interrelate a little bit, and that they may affect each other and of course the discussion down the road as well. Edmund, is that correct?
Yeah, through the chair. So the next 2 that we're gonna speak about is residential tax incentives, which we're talking about a residential package specifically to this, but we can look at it generally, and looking at a municipally controlled corporation on how do we implement it and how do we want to partner is really what the conversation is. So they're somewhat related, to Mr. Rousseau's point, one of the things is if council could narrow it down, if a few that we want to, a few options even on what we want to focus on, because each option really has next steps on what we want to look at, right? If we want to go with selling the land, we need to, start looking at what those possible conditions could be for council to start considering if this is the right option for us. If we do want to go to an EOI, either generally and looking at that phased in for all of our lands, or just looking at one parcel in a pilot, and we need to start thinking about, what's important to council, and we need to start developing that. So it does help, and there are, you know, there is a step to all of these options that we would like to start getting, to work on.
Thank you. Council, there is a consensus request on the floor. Any further discussion on that? Seeing none, then I will call the question that committee accept the report for information. Council, if you could please vote now. Councillor Taylor against. And that is Councillor Stashik, yours is working now?
For this one, it did.
Okay, good, just wanted to confirm, so that is defeated. It is defeated unanimously, with council in favor. Councillor Haas.
Yeah, I'd like to make the recommended action. The committee seeks consensus requesting administration bring the infill land development recapitulation options and opportunities report with additional information and details for execution of the preferred options to a future committee of the whole as discussed. And I think I would say to add the committee seek consensus requesting administration bring a draft outline of a land acquisition management policy to a future committee of the whole meeting as discussed as well. So if I can speak to that.
Please.
We spoke a lot about the first part of the direction, but the second part is to that business oriented practice that Mr. Russo was mentioning, that we have no real policy on the acquisition and management of lands. So I'd like to see administrations start having that conversation of an outline for having a policy on this as well, to make it much more smoother and more efficient. Because we know without a policy, you know, it doesn't have consistency. So, yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you, Councillor Stashik.
Process wise, I'm not sure if committee has, any options that they really don't wanna see come forward more fleshed out. Or if there is a preferred option, then I guess I'd also ask administration, is it helpful to have some input from committee today about what they might wanna see or might not want to see?
Edmund, would you care to respond to that?
Through the chair, yes, if there's, you know, if council has, you know, an orientation or a preference for some and versus not others, that would be helpful.
If I could speak to it,
Yeah,
there are a couple that I'm not really interested in giving direction to administration to pursue. Option 2, list properties for public auction. I don't think that's probably the most beneficial way to be able to get concerted interest and maximum dollars for the lands that we're selling. And then the other one that I'm not really particularly interested would be option 4, vendor financing. I don't think it's the town's place to offer financing to developers, and it's not something that I think I would want to get into. And then there is another one. I'm a little bit on the fence and it's not a hill I'm gonna die on. But actually, option 1, I'm not certain that I'm fully supportive of moving forward with option 1. Option 1 sounds like it would involve quite a bit of back and forth between administration and council to develop the scoring matrix, and then collecting EOIs and analyzing them and bringing them back to council for decision. I think if this is something that we're looking to expedite, that we want to move forward, I think my favorite option would be option 3, with a list of conditions and probably rezoning done in advance of the properties being listed for sale, so that potential proponents know what they're zoned for, that they understand, you know, that's zoned for a multifamily residential property or whatever it is that it winds up being zoned for. I think that's probably one of the quicker ways and one of the clearer ways to so that potential proponents understand the sale price expectation of what's to be developed there and timelines in which it would be developed. Thank you.
please, Councillor Stashik, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, and through the chair to administration. From my perspective, you know, I'm interested in competitive processes that put the town in the best position. But looking forward, I'm most interested in the properties on McLeod Ave, Chevy Drive, and Mauer in the near term, keeping in mind that Rowan Street, the utilization at the at the recycling center, could change with the change of our recycling program, and that'll change up, the potential options over at Rowan Street. And, from my perspective, those three offer the fastest means towards getting some new residential development in town here. The remainder, the tier two options, I think strategies, are needed for those options going forward. They'll have substantially higher costs, the town to disperse. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilor Race.
Thank you, sir. To administration, is the land acquisition management policy similar to the land disposition policy? Are they two different things?
Through the chair to members of council, so it's both. Right, it's how we manage our land and what's the processes around that, so it touches on everything.
But they are two different. Things.
No, with this motion, it'll be looking at how we manage it, both the disposition, acquisition, and management of the property.
Thank you.
Councilor Haas, thank you.
Yeah, no, I, appreciate the, I didn't realize it was, intended to pick options, but I would agree, with a lot of what Councilor Stashik said, there are some definitely option 2, option 4. I have no desire personally to consider those. I do agree, with the mayor as well, but my assumption, I guess, would be if we were to move forward this evening with a recommendation of an option, then that's how we would get into that depth of the conversation of what the mayor was talking about, of where the different lands are and what's more strategic at this point moving forward, similar to possibly option 5 as well, as maybe more than one pilot project potentially. So personally, I mean, yeah, I would see option 3 and option 5 bringing back as for more information. And I appreciate the EOI, but yeah, I'm not sure that that's exactly what we want to do. I think we need to take a different approach, and those two options are. So I'm willing, at this point, I would be willing to amend my direction to amend it to preferred options 3 and 5 to a future committee of the whole meeting as discussed. But I'd like to hear from others if that's any thoughts on that. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Haas. I have myself up next and Councilor Taylor. My question, in principle, I'm supportive of options 3 and 5. My question for administration, based on the way the report's written, and I need clarification. Just under option 5, it says development incentives, but it's presented in the same format as the options above, the underlined title. Would you consider development incentives as part of any of those particular options?
Short answer is yes.
Perfect. Okay, then speaking to the consensus request on the table regarding the amendment, I would be supportive. Councilor Taylor.
I think I'm in favor of what the mayor said. I'm in favor of just opening up lands where we can start getting more houses built to the minimum process as quickly as possible. I think that's what we need. Those properties that you talked about, although problematic in the past, that council can show firm resolve, will accomplish that. That's a big if, but I think those are good ways to go. And those options, 3 certainly just list the property, get it ready. It's a good way to go.
Council, I do not have anybody else in queue. There is an amendment on the floor to the consensus. So we'll just wait until that appears. We'll just make sure that everybody's read it properly and is captured. So the amendment is to add options 3 and 5 to the consensus request on the floor. Administration, are you comfortable with that wording? Clear enough for you?
Through the chair, if it could just be brought up, I can't.
Oh,
I
you
don't
can't.
have access to it.
Currently, it says add options 3 and 5.
Oh, yeah, I think that's fine. Yeah.
Okay. Council, any further discussion on that before we vote on the consensus? Seeing none, we'll call to question. If you could please vote, now. Counselor, Taylor is in favor. That is carried 5-1 with the mayor against. So then that will bring us to, the consensus request on the floor. That committee seeks consensus requesting administration bring the infill land development resolutions, options and opportunities report with additional information and details for execution of the preferred options 3 and 5 to a future committee of the whole meeting as discussed. And that committee seeks consensus requesting administration bring a draft outline of a land acquisition management policy to a future committee meeting, or a future committee of the whole meeting as discussed. Council, any discussion around that before we call to question? Seeing none, we will call to question. If you can please vote now. There, oh, there it is. And that is carried 6 unanimously, pardon me, with council fully in favor. Thank you, council. Councilor Taylor.
Just an aside, you know, some of these chunks of land are just a nice size for like, modest development. Cause our house building rate isn't that great, so it takes forever to build out, development, like my Trestle place where I live, that was developed, 10, 12 years ago, 38 lots. You know, 12 years later, it's still under development. Some of these will be smaller than that, so it's just a nice size for, a modest housing development with our current growth rate, so it would attract a wide range of people, assuming that we can get past the issues of, resolve that I spoke about.
Thank you, Councilor Taylor. Council, anything else? Seeing none at this point, the chair will call a 10-minute recess so that we can have a bio break and get those pictures done that we need to get done. So it is 5:21. We will resume at 5:31.